Hello, everybody. My name is Myles. And this is my friend Jeff, and together we're the Casualties Podcast. Take it away, Jeff.
All right, today we're talking about the little engine that did. A lot of people think about Africa very negatively. What's the first thoughts that come up when you think about Africa, especially when it comes
No water.
No water.
Can't buy water because they have no money to buy water.
Can't buy water. Usually famines.
Famines.
A lot of bad things. Well, today we're talking about the little country that was able to overcome all of that. And it looked like it was doomed to failure. And now it's actually considered a middle-class country. And it's actually probably the stablest and one of the richest countries in Africa. And of course, this country is very dear to our heart. Who are we talking about, Myles?
Today we're talking about Botswana, and funny story, they're the reason this podcast exists. Because I, as a joke, was saying to my friend Jeff over here, we should make a podcast about the socioeconomic status of Botswana, and he took that idea and was like, okay, but for real though. And I was like, oh, okay, well.
Yes. And one of the funny things is, after about a year of experimenting with it, going back, creating a bunch of videos that probably never will get posted, some will,
yeah.
Most won't.
Yeah.
We literally have recorded like 3 or 4 videos in a row that never got posted because they all got corrupted and issues with the file sizes and whatnot. But today, we're trying to do something on a little bit smaller note, do our first vignette, first little entry into the shorter video sphere, where we like to talk about the long video exposés that I'm going to, in the future, call the heralds, and these are going to be our big pieces where we do a deep dive and stuff. But today, I really want to kick off the series where we go into the short and narrow stuff. Try to get into something that is very small, but can still have a big impact, and now we're all casualty. So today we're talking about Botswana, and I call it the economic miracle of Africa, is Botswana. It is a really cool story, really cool place that started off with not a lot going on for it. So, the first little bit about Botswana. So, I know a lot of these numbers here and a lot of this information is probably feeling very much like, what the heck does that even mean? But put into context, this is some pretty amazing stuff. So to know what Botswana is, it's a country with a population of only like 2.4 million. It's a small population-wise country, but it has a lot of land. But if you look at this map here, Botswana, everyone always lives in that east part. That little shallow plain area in the east is where everyone lives. Because the vast majority of it is desert. And that actually played to its strength historically. There's a big part of that on how they are able to be so successful and stable today.
Is that because they were able to avoid colonization and invasion based off the desert?
They weren't colonized, but essentially what happened was the British looked at them and said, this land is not worth it. This is a worthless desert. We're not going to destroy all the institutions, everything that the locals had created, and some of that survived. And a big reason for that is because they have this huge Kalahari desert that essentially was very hard for anyone other than small bands of human beings to live in. And with that this country, when it was first founded, had a GDP of under $1 billion. It was like only 50 million, I believe, at that time. And the average GDP per capita, which is the amount of the economy per person, was at $59.
Oh, wow.
It was one of the cheapest. That's not bad. It was one of the poorest countries in the world, and I believe it for a time was actually considered the poorest country in the world when it got independent. And this is something coming from 1960s Africa. This is a terrible situation. They didn't have a single paved road at one point because of the degradation. They did not invest in any kind of real rail infrastructure. Very little was actually put into this colony, so this is why the British just essentially left it to rot. But now today, the country has a GDP of 21 billion, which is roughly on pace with Moldova, a small Eastern European country. They have a GDP per capita of $7,900. Moldova is at $8,200. And just to make that comparison, is like, it's not the richest country in the world, but it's getting there. That's lower middle income on the world scale.
It's doing a lot better than its neighbors, that's for sure.
Yes, like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, all those countries, they're doing terrible. So, again, talking about the population, it's all concentrated in that big area in the east. However, most of them do live in rural farms. There's a lot of herdsmen. There's a lot of local nomadic tribesmen. A lot of people that honestly, to be very candid, this is where the stereotypes come from. The people moving the yaks along on the roads, that is where this comes from. A lot of that is from the image of Botswana. only has 2.4 million people, which is a little bit less than Mississippi. But it is a bit larger, or actually a bit smaller than Texas. So it is a pretty big area with not a lot of people in it. But one thing that this country has going for it in the very beginning that most other countries did not was 80% of it were from the same ethnic group and spoke the same language.
Yeah, I was about to ask what the ethnicity distribution was and if that played a role in why it was able to succeed as well as it did.
It did. It played a big role because a lot of the ethnic institutions were not destroyed by the British colonial regime because they had no interest in it. So some democracy in Botswana has existed for probably 500, 600, 700 years. And they have some experience with that. They mostly speak the same language. The minorities aren't that ostracized either. And that is something where they have a lot of national unity. And they were honestly one of those few countries that the harsh environment turned out to be a blessing in the long run. Because once you get to Botswana's economy, there's a lot of great things, but it boils down to one thing: diamonds. And 80% of everything they export, $5 billion, is diamonds, rough diamonds.
It's interesting, though, that you say that Britain had no interest in when they produced something so valuable.
The big thing was most of these will not be discovered until after independence or after the road to independence was started in the 1940s.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So a lot of this was done by them being able to support themselves with diamonds. A quarter of all their GDP, so like I said, $5 billion of exports comes from diamonds. This is a huge industry for them. And it is actually the oldest continuous democracy in Africa since they have been a stable democracy since 1966. Last year was the first time a different party came to power. However, it is believed that every single election they have had has been a free and fair election. And it is something where the ruling party stayed in power because they're super trusted.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You remember the Congo episode? That was a mess.
Yep.
And only a few hundred miles south is Botswana here with much less given to them. And they are doing so much more. But anyways, the reason why this all succeeded was because of one thing: Botswana. You probably never heard of Botswana.
I have no idea who that is.
So, as I said, Botswana is one of the biggest diamond exporters, behind Russia and sometimes behind Canada. Them and Canada go neck and neck, and Russia is the largest diamond exporters. But they made a deal with De Beers Jewelry to be able to make and produce and be able to ship out rough diamonds out of their land. So what happened was, right when independence happened, they had these huge diamond mines just popping up all over the place. And the president saw an opportunity. His name is Seretse Khama.
He looks like a alternate version of Snoop Dogg.
Honestly, with seeing how he spoke, I wouldn't be shocked if he would have been a Snoop Dogg if he was born in America. But he had a lot of swagger. But the big thing is he also represented the will. He represented the will of the people really well. And he created this joint venture with De Beers called Botswana, which the first name De Beers, Deb, Swana, Botswana, where half of the company is owned by the state of Botswana, the other half is owned by the De Beers Corporation. And the way that worked out is they would go 50-50 on the investment in the funds, and the way the deal worked out was 75% of all rough diamonds would be for De Beers to sell, 25% would be for Botswana to sell. And I know that sounds like a small margin, but for the time of how these African countries were working, this was something where a lot of them would either force nationalization on these companies and kick them out, or they would be completely taken advantage of because usually French intervention or something like that. However, or
like some kind of a Banana Republic type of situation.
Exactly.
That's what I was expecting when you mentioned the company.
Khama saw that coming, so he worked in earnest with the company, and they have actually come to a great agreement. So what essentially happened was you have this diamond company coming in and taking control, and they do something where most other companies fall behind in this, is they agree to work with the government on this, and the government has a good portion of their funds go into it. But that means that De Beers, with all the experience of doing this for, I think they have done diamonds for a century by this point, they come in and build infrastructure. They build highways. they build rail network. Bless you.
Thank you.
And remember how I said that Britain did not invest in Botswana at all?
Right.
Every other colony around them had major rail networks pass through them, had major roads built by the British. Post-independence... Bless you.
Thanks.
You're allergic to Dobby.
I'm allergic to their cat.
Post-independence, they built their roads and rail networks themselves in Botswana. Every other country relied on what the previous colonial overlords had built.
Right.
And this, in turn, built a lot of resentment where a lot of people feel the government should build new stuff, and a lot of them felt like the colonists should pay for more of the old stuff. Whereas Botswana did not have that. Botswana had to build it themselves. And what happened with this is you see them invest a lot in their infrastructure where they have this big railroad in the east of the country which reaches most of the population. They have this huge highway network that De Beers helps build. In the areas that De Beers doesn't build in, that is where they're able to take their own tax funds and build their own roads so they're able to reach more people. And through this, they gather all this money to get together and they say we need to be able to invest in the wealth of our country. So with this, they build things like huge water systems. I actually Googled this because I didn't believe the number first off. It's believed that every single person in Botswana has access to advanced drinking water, which means water that will not cause disease, will not cause issues.
They're doing better than some places in America.
Yes. And they also, most people will have access to food markets that are not extremely expensive.
Even the people in the desert have access to this?
Yes. They call it, it may not be in the house because I believe they said somewhere in the area of only like 75% of houses have complete clean running water, but every single person in Botswana will have running water near them in their municipality. So that is something that they have. But the way that they did this was they realized two things. They could sell these diamonds for a fortune, and they did sell them for a fortune.
Right.
And when the marginalized revolution, which is, I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it was this big movement in the 80s and 90s towards capitalism where a lot of countries went away from socialism and the communist bloc fell apart.
Right.
Markets liberalized. People could buy more things. A huge amount of trade was happening. And that brought their economy way up because people wanted nice things. And what's a nice thing?
Diamonds.
Diamonds. Exactly. And they continued to invest in the diamonds. They found one of the largest diamond mines in 2003, and in 2016 they found another large one. So they continuously invested in diamonds. But they've also saw that the road might run out on diamonds.
Right. That was something that I was thinking is like, that's a very finite resource. I'm wondering if they invested in something else, but clearly they thought about this too, which is a lot more farsighted than a lot of people, even here in America.
So with this, they understood that they need to spread the wealth somehow, but they also need to be able to add value. And there was this idea where they wanted to be able to have the best of both worlds, or more realistically, they wanted to be pragmatic, and they understood we need to be able to provide something for our people. And they had brilliant ways to be able to do this. Number one, a lot of the local institutions that I was talking about at the village level, a lot of those remained intact, and a lot of the ideas of building consensus was there. This gave the chance for long-term institutions to take control. And Botswana had a few times where they were unstable and it looked like the government could be toppled, but the institutions were strong enough to fight that off. The big reason why is because they took all this money from diamonds and they invested it in these large parastatal organizations. You probably never heard the term parastatal.
Nope.
So essentially, what happened was these companies were formed by the Botswanan government, and parastatal is a term for state-owned enterprises in Africa. If you look all over the place in Africa, there's a bunch of examples of this, either number one being corruption for European exploitation, or number two, just essentially ways to launder money into the country.
Oh.
However, what they did was they tried to avoid being the ones to directly provide the service. So a good example of this would be they had the Botswana Beef Commission, which sounds like they would buy up all the beef and just force farmers to sell it. However, it wasn't something that actually provided the beef. They just built a market where they took the local beef farmers, they found them buyers, and they were the ones to build the bridge. And eventually over time, as the market grew large enough, they decided that they were going to privatize this and turn it into a regulatory body by the government, and the market could handle itself. What they saw was this
That
little...
kind of sounds like the cheese mines and what led to those here in the States, but better.
It's a lot better, man, because it wasn't... They didn't store it. They didn't store the beef themselves. They just found buyers to sell it to. They were trying to be able to build that bridge, because what they saw was this little desert country understood that it takes decades for things to naturally develop, because when Western observers came in, capitalist observers came in, they said, no, you need to let the market naturally do these things. And Eastern observers come in, and they say, no, you need to control these items and tell them where they need to go in a command economy style. They said, we don't want either. We want the locals to build the market, or to build up the companies to do this. However, they don't have the constitution, they don't have the strength to do this yet. So they built these large parasitical companies, which I'm here on out going to call SOEs, state-owned enterprises. And they would essentially build the markets like there wasn't a banking system. Instead, they would have local people create their own small microfinancing banks, and they would create the big bank that would help these companies, these little small banks, survive on their own. And the goal was, as soon as they get big enough, they'll privatize these and they'll take it off of the government's balance sheet so they don't have to pay for stuff anymore. The way that this worked with the beef market was beef farmers found enough buyers and were so used to being able to sell their stuff that they didn't need that SOE anymore, and they privatize it, and the government doesn't need to spend all of that money on their budget to do it anymore. So the government has savings, the market's not big enough to survive on its own, and they essentially jump-started their economy. It was something where they essentially saw that we need this good governance to be able to have these things happen. And this is how they diversified their economy and spread the wealth around all through the country. In fact, like Botswana, the government owns a stock exchange, but they don't do anything other than making sure that they meet regulatory requirements, and they help sell the stocks so these companies can gain capital. This is how these companies can grow and actually build stuff so they can concentrate capital to build more infrastructure and employ more people. And you even see this currently with their utility companies. Their water companies, they're not going to privatize anytime soon, but they're helping local contractors build the water networks, and they train local contractors to build stuff so they don't need the government to necessarily rebuild any issues that pop up. So what this means is local Africans are being taught how to be able to fix these issues. And they are able to do it themselves, and they don't need to rely on outside influences to build it. Get the training.
That's really impressive.
Yes, it's extremely impressive. And going back to the Botswana organization, the way they built this was such a smart move, and they took years to design this. The way that it has been developed now is where the chairman of Botswana, the overall long-term planning person of the head, isn't even from Botswana. And they're not even from South Africa where De Beers has started out. It's some random British man named Bruce Cleaver. It's either Cleaver or Cleaver. I don't know exactly how he pronounces it.
Let's just go with Cleaver.
Yeah, Bruce Cleaver.
That sounds more British.
But he built a long-term strategy for Botswana. And then next to him right here, Andrew Motsomi is the managing director. He manages everything on the ground in Botswana. Essentially, he overlooks and sees that everything is meeting the standards and that Botswana is getting the benefits that it needs. And Duma Boko, he's the president of Botswana. And he even talks on television about how he wants to add value to the local Botswana people. He wants to be able to do so many great things. And he talks, and every president talks like that, but he talks in a different style of actually understanding how the economic benefits are happening, and he's able to spread it around. And he now talks about that we are wealthy enough to be able to start introducing long-term welfare plans. They essentially have their own version of food stamps that they can provide to people. And with this, these investments are growing more and more to help people become more and more stable. It is a lot more concentrated in their capital, but he has made investments to be able to spread this out. And this is beginning their own universities and trade schools where a lot of local Africans can learn these trades and skills as well and expand it to their own local areas. I don't even know why I'm saying Africans. This is all in Botswana because their neighbors aren't welcoming them. And there's actually a huge issue with a lot of their neighbors wanting to come in and enjoy the benefits.
Many such cases.
So with this, you see them having this huge growth in GDP, and they're investing again into their country. And I don't know if you can even make out that image. That literally is the same spot over 6 years. They go from 10 huts to being able to have huge skyscrapers. And Botswana has made sure that they have invested directly back into their economy. And the biggest thing with those state-owned enterprises, a lot of people usually take the profits directly from the company and put it back into the economy. No. That's not what Botswana does. They tax it like any other regular corporation, which means that when they privatize it, they're not going to have a huge drop in revenue. They're going to keep on just using those same tax revenues and operate as usual, which means that as these SOEs, which they have a board that is intentionally built to find ways to be able to privatize everything so they can save more money on it, they are building and jump-starting their economy, and this has pushed them into lower middle income class status. And they actually look like they might be the first African nation to be considered developed. By 2036, within the next 10 years, actually, I know that'd be 2035, but it's looking like it could be 2035, where they might be the first, they might be the first truly developed African nation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So with this, taking that wealth, being able to learn how to put it in a smart vehicle. And these vehicles aren't even fully government owned. They're usually about half of the government, half private stakeholders. And that's like local wealthy businessmen, plus also most of the employees get stock in these companies as well. And that's where no one has a majority and they have to compromise. This is the secret of Botswana's success. This is what's leading to more investment opportunities. It's a small, nascent country right now, but they have so many opportunities. Like, they failed at manufacturing. They tried in the 90s and 2000s to become manufacturers, but because they're landlocked, because they have such unstable neighbors, they really couldn't ship stuff in and out of the country.
Right.
But what they could do was they had the wealth to be able to invest in other areas. Even though it's small now, it only produced $38 billion last year. But they have a growing green economy where they're investing in drip farming, where it's instead of just pouring water all over crops, they slowly drip water into the crops to save on water. They're investing in solar energy to be able to make it a fourth of the size as it needs to be to get the same amount of energy. Also doing a lot of specialization for fighting desertification and being able to do reforestation in their country. And they're leading in a lot of the research and development for this. This is
Oh, wow.
where we can see a huge step up for this. So now, as we end off on our first vignette, what are your thoughts on Botswana so far?
It seems like the best of what people over here in the States or just around the world talk about when it comes to like how markets and governments work in terms of like how the government should be involved in the market and how the market should impact the country that it's a part of. It seemed like it's almost like they were able to, I don't know, I'm just like genuinely impressed. Like, because every time we talk about Africa, it's always super depressing. Everybody's dying. Nothing's working out. Everything seems to just be going downhill. But these guys seem to take a bad situation and turn it around to the point where I'm kind of jealous. And I'm just genuinely impressed to the point where, like, I can definitely see Botswana being like a huge influence. Like, best case scenario, they're a huge influence for the rest of the continent and can help stabilize the continent. But I don't even know what that would look like without armed military conflict. So who knows? Maybe not. But it's like that point in the movie where everything's going well. It's like a montage, and you're just like waiting for the other boot to drop. It's like I kept waiting for you to say, but then everything started to go bad. But you never did. So that was impressive. That was good to hear.
Well, technically, their economy did contract. Their GDP used to be, and their GDP per capita used to be higher, but they're still surviving well. They only had a contraction of 3%. There's no overreaction. There's no things falling through the roof. They've been very stable. My thing is, as a country of 2 million, can they bring that to other countries around them? There's so much ethnic tension and ethnic rife that Botswana just does not have.
Right.
That I'm like, can they bring this to the forefront? Can they make this shine? Because the funny thing is, like, Botswana, compared to its neighbors, was the worst out of all their neighbors when they gained independence in the 60s.
in terms of what they're left with.
Yeah, well, they weren't even given anything in the first place.
Right.
South Africa was a net energy producer, as in they put out too much energy for their own country, and they exported it. Now they don't have enough that they have rolling blackouts constantly. Zimbabwe has collapsed several times since independence, and they were the shining star when Rhodesia turned into Zimbabwe and Mugabe took over. My throat is really dry. Zambia turned into a debt trap country where they just keep on getting more and more debt from the IMF and other places, and they just keep on getting deeper. Botswana is the only bright light. The real question, though, is, not only will they bring stability, do you think that this is replicable?
Yes, but with asterisks and heavy quotation marks, because it seems like, I don't want to sound like that guy, but it seems like the whole not having any ethnic tensions in the area seems to have played a huge role in the stability at the very least, because most of the times when you hear about the instability of other places in that continent, it's like different tribes are going at it with each other, and there can't be any unified effort into improving the country for everybody, because it's always our group versus their group. And it seems like they don't seem to have that as much of a struggle with that. So it's like,
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I think that it is very much one of those things where it's going to be hard to replicate, but if there's enough momentum behind a leader, that they can do it. But the hard thing is you also need like 30 years of stability to really get to where they are.
They didn't do they didn't pull a DC cinematic universe. They pulled a MCU where they did everything slowly and built things up. This is hope they don't do a post Endgame where everything falls flat on its face. Everything after
they'll have one-off ideas and then they'll collapse. This is, although I am really happy to read about African country, because like we've done several now, and I'm like, this is sad.
It's so depressing. This should be the first episode, honestly.
That's why it's the first vignette, although we're starting to get into non-vignette territory. I want to ask one last question. I think, and the question is, how do we think this will impact the wider world? And my big thing is, I will see Botswana in 2036 or 2035 as an economic world power that will have some sway and some weight. And I can see where this is where everyone leans on. Kind of like how everyone looks at Japan in the 60s, 70s, and 80s as this rising titan. I could see Botswana.
Or like how they look at South Korea nowadays.
Exactly. I could see them viewing that. And with the current stage of political fright that everyone's in, I could see where Botswana is that country who has great relations with every country because they keep their heads down and don't get involved in stuff. I could see where we could see a lot of anti-Western countries around them, and this might be the country, like, obviously for very different reasons, but the Israel of Africa, where they're the only pro-U.S. country in the region.
But this time without any of the baggage that comes with that.
Yes. And that is where I could see Botswana really thriving in the future. I don't know. What do you think?
I was thinking the same thing, where it's probably going to be them using their economic power for influence or in the area, and if they play their cards right, they can use their powers for good and improve their neighbors as well. Because it'd be so easy just to like, oh, we're doing pretty well, let's use this ability to take advantage of everybody else around us, or let's improve the situation around us so we can do better as well and not have to worry about our neighbors collapsing around us and taking us with them. I think it would be the smart play.
Yeah, I definitely think it'd be the smart play. And I also wouldn't be shocked if in 20 years, if South Africa turns into a civil war and Botswana becomes the home to a lot of refugees. They're already home to thousands of Zimbabwean refugees, and that's a big political issue in their country. But that,
many such cases.
That is where I am wondering that like Botswana could play a huge role in that. And I think that this country with a lot of promise, and I hope that we come back to this country in a few years, that it's the first country we're able to go onto the road to and visit, and we can interview people for it. But yeah, I am very positive on Botswana, And do you have anything else you'd like to add at the end?
Please don't screw this up.
Yes, please don't. Botswana, we love you. Take care of yourself. Keep doing what you do. And I think that'll do it for us. If there's any other topics you'd like us to talk about, please leave it in the comments. If there's also anything else about Botswana you want to mention, or other stuff you want us to cover about Botswana, please leave in the comments, like and subscribe to this video. And I hope you enjoyed our first vignette. We have plenty of other stuff that we're going to be doing, but I appreciate that. But we really appreciate having you here, and I think that we can really do something great. Thank you, and bye for now.